All right, looking not so bright-eyed nor bushy-tailed. I'm here. It's 10:15 Saturday night. Kids and the wife are in bed, and I tell you, you should see me during the middle of the day. I am wide-eyed, full of energy. At the end of the day, not so much, but I figured instead of watching a couple more hours of football between now and when I fall asleep, maybe we could start the Ember client. So where we left off, if you remember, or if you haven't, or if you don't remember, if you weren't along for the ride so far, is we're making this charity auction management software. We've now sort of built the basic foundation of the server for this application. I mean, it'll have a lot more features eventually, but it has kind of the basics, at least up through donation management, not through bidding, but through the donation management and user management and auction management, etc. It's got some number of things that I think are interesting. So that's what we have so far. We haven't done anything on the client. We've built a JSON API compliant server. So I think we're going to jump over to the Ember side now and get the basic bits set up, get the repository working, maybe create some issues around the URLs that we want to enable, and I don't know. I don't think I've got all that much energy, so probably go for hour and a half or something. Just get a basic app up that can connect to the server. That'll be good. Probably should have done this already. So anywhere we get will be good progress. Okay. So let's get going. All right. So now we don't have a GitHub project for this. I'm going to go back to our GitHub project for the server just to see where we left off. Now, we haven't done authorization, so it'll basically permit whatever. We do have authentication, so we can at least get that bit done. We'll probably do that first, or near first, right after we get the sort of basic bits of the Ember app going. So we left the server side in pretty good shape. We do not have a web application for this yet, so I guess we're gonna create that next, and we'll push it up and maybe build a handful of issues to start out with. Okay, so as I've done before, what we'll do is just go to the Ember website, because you know what I mean. If you're doing this on your own, this is what you're going to do. You're going to search for the library you're going to use, or the whole framework in this case, and check out what it says to do. So I'm gonna, I know how to do this, but let's just sort of go through it like as if you were doing it on your own. Okay, so the Ember guides are quite helpful. You'll see that they're versioned, which is really great. So right now Ember is on version 2.1. I think that's somewhat recent, and all of the guides are updated for 2.1, which is really nice. Didn't used to be that way, and in fact, when you search on Google for a particular topic, the vast majority of the time it'll send you to the guides for a version other than the current version. So sort of be on the lookout for that when you're searching for answers to whatever questions you've got. What we're going to do is we'll just go to the getting started content, and we're just going to follow it as if as if we hadn't done this before. The bit that I like about that is that it'll sort of show what you can depend on documentation wise, and how this isn't all that bad. So we have to have Node. I'll check on my machine what I've got. .0.12.7, which is fine. So we're good with that. We've got Git, obviously. So we will run npm install ember CLI. Now, if you haven't ever used Ember, I'll give some basic intro into some things. So Ember CLI is the command line interface for Ember. It's sort of like in Rails, how you have their Rails command line interface. It used to be that Ember CLI wasn't part of Ember. There were predecessors to it and sort of a non-CLI way to manage Ember apps that you'll see also when you Google for things. But this has been the way for at least a year. I think that maybe more than that now, that's caught on and become pretty popular. And I don't think that Ember CLI is sort of officially merged into Ember and is sort of completely up to date with 2.1 just yet, but it's pretty close and it will be soon. Okay, and you'll see we'll follow the instructions and you know, they're going to be Ember CLI centric, and most modern sort of blog posts and other things you'll find online are using Ember CLI. Okay, so 1.13.8. While you're at it, install Phantom.js. Well, we're going to do this because they said to do it in the guides. We won't be writing tests right away. For this, I'll wait until I've got some wait till I've got some integration tests to run. But you know, we might as well do this since it says to do it in the documentation here. All right. Next, it says verify that our Ember version is successful or whatever. Now, it's a little, there's going to be a little bit of a weird bit here once we, so this is the version of this 1.13.8 is the version of Ember CLI, not Ember. It's very confusing. I think this is going to get rectified pretty soon. And you'll see we'll have to change a couple of things when we build our Ember app to have it use 2.1, given that the full merge hasn't happened yet. But you know, it's not that bad. Okay, so my first Ember app. So let's do this. So Ember new and then the name of it. So let's go Ember new, and this is going to be charity auction web. All right, so this is just like Rails new, right? I mean, there are a couple differences in sort of the style that Ember uses. For example, it's going to create an initial git commit, which Rails doesn't do, which I think Rails should do. I don't think that Rails runs bundle install, which is sort of the equivalent of what's being, maybe it does. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But you know, anyhow, so this created the initial application. It creates a commit that adds all of the code that it created when you ran Ember new. It installs all the packages. Now npm is sort of notoriously slow, so you know, don't think that something's broken. But you know, pretty shortly it'll build. So why don't we go ahead and we'll read ahead on the Ember docs to see what's going to come next. Okay, so once that finishes, we'll change directory into that and then run Ember server, which is the same as Rails server, you know, conceptually at least. And then it's going to run the app on localhost 4200, and that's going to sort of rebuild as any changes are made to the application, to the file system, which is really nice. Ember CLI is handling all that as it describes right here, and that's quite handy. Okay, so that was done. So we're going to cd into that, and we'll do exactly what they said, which is run Ember server. It'll run it on 4200. And what we're going to do is use Chrome, because the Ember inspector is pretty great. It's a Chrome, I think, add-on is, I guess I'm not positive. Maybe the name is add-on, but it's a Chrome widget that makes it quite nice to sort of debug things in Ember. So you'll see it boots here, and it gives us a whole bunch of features we'll be using later. I'm not going to give a tour through that because we're going to have we're going to be using it very frequently. But anyhow, we followed the instructions, or the basic instructions here. I'm not going to do a build now. Later, we'll eventually deploy this to, I think we'll use S3. That's what I typically do in the workflow that I know the best. I think it'd be easy enough to look at the other workflows too, but we're going to use S3 to host the Ember app. And Ember deploy or Ember CLI deploy, whatever it's called, to manage that deploy process. But that'll come maybe in the next week or so. We'll get to that. Okay, so we've got our basic Ember app. So why don't we take a look at it and do some initial work. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is make sure we're using Ember 2.1. I said that it's a little weird that the instructions you use in the guide for Ember use Ember CLI 1.17.8 or whatever that number was. And if we look at the version of Ember that's installed by it, I don't believe it's going to be 2.1. So we're gonna fix that. Yep. So 1.13.7 was the last version on the sort of 1 dot track. So we're going to go to 2.1.0 here. And we also will do the same on Ember data. And again, this is because Ember CLI has not caught up to, it's not sort of merged in quite yet. So, and I just sort of blanked on, is it Bower? I blinked on how to reinstall it. Is it Bower install? What is the syntax for this? This is embarrassing that I don't remember this. All right, good. So let's see what it says here. So choose one. We're going to go with this guy because we want to use Ember 2.1. Okay, update available. Well, what the heck, we'll do that. All right, so now when we boot up this application, you see right now, if we look at the version of Ember, oh, look, it is 2.1. I wonder if it just refreshed. I think it probably did. Yeah, it did. So before it was running the old version of Ember, now it's running the newer. That's what we wanted. So good. Okay. So let's commit this, push it up to GitHub, and just make sure we sort of have that base. Okay, so we need to make a repository for this. Okay. Example, Ember application for charity auction management. And there we go, good enough. So let's just sort of take a quick tour through Ember a little bit. And then why don't we create a few issues on the things that we want. You know, let's do that first, actually. So we're going to create a few issues on this app and then go through them. And I'm not going to worry about the design at all now. So we're going to try to use, you know, good sort of semantic markup, no more than we have to, get the basic functionality working, and then come back and do the styling later. You'll find that that's actually pretty reasonable to do, especially if we're, I think, we don't mind it looking a little ugly for a while. I don't have a design fully built out yet, and I think maybe that's a good idea to do, but that's not how we're going to do it for this one, because it's 10:30 and I just don't have my design sort of interest all that high right now. So let's create a few issues. So one is I would like to, let's see, create a new user. And we'll call this like register a new user. And let's see, so that's going to be like a link on the home page and a registration form. And then maybe a login page. And then, well, at the very least, let's go with these two, actually. So link on the home page to a registration form, and then the registration form itself. Yeah, we'll keep it nice and simple. Back on the labels, I'll just add the one I always do, which is ready to work. That is not what I wanted. All right, so here we go. Ready. All right. And you know what? That's fine. We'll just get going with this and build this first new feature. Now, in the process of building that, we will also have to set up things like some of the Ember data config and some other basic sort of setup of the application. But instead of trying to do that in the abstract, why don't we do it in the context of an issue that we're working on? Okay, so goal one, we want to be able to sort of create a form and register a new user. And I just made these two bullets. So one is we want a link on the home page that goes to a registration form, and then another one, and then that registration form, we want to be able to enter the data and then push it up or persist the data in the server and get back the information and do something with it. All right, so let's do that. And hey, I'll warn. So at the beginning, this is just to get your feet wet with what Ember looks like. We're going to probably change a couple of these details. It won't look that interesting, but whatever. It'll be fine, and it'll get the basic setup right and sort of demystify if you're unfamiliar with some of the Ember processes, or if you're new to using Ember data with a JSON API server, it'll introduce some of that, which will be good. Okay, so let's do it. So I'm just sort of going to dive in. Instead of doing a full tour of the Ember app, I think it'll become pretty obvious how things work, or at least parts will be obvious and parts will be a little bit mysterious. There's an app folder like a Rails app, and it kind of has the same convention over configuration style that Rails does, but the words can mean some different things, and there are some new ideas that don't exist in Rails, and so you're gonna have to forget some things, but and you're gonna have to learn some new things, and some things that you're used to in terms of convention, following conventions are going to help you out with Ember. So let's start by just changing our little welcome guy. It says welcome to Ember, and just to make it our own here, we will say charity auction. And you see that would reload if I was running Ember server here. Server. That is not what I meant to type. So now when this boots, you'll see this page will refresh automatically. And then anytime we make a change, it will too, which is nice. You get sort of immediate feedback on any change that you end up making, which is quite handy. Okay, so now it says charity auctions. If I go back here and make that plural or singular, you'll see it refreshes right away. Okay, so the first idea we're going to sort of get into is that in Ember, the URL translates into a route. And if you're doing it right in Ember, you're thinking in URLs first. So here, this is the, just sort of the root of the application. And if we go into our Ember inspector routes, you'll see the current route that it's the application index route. And if I go into my router, you'll see that nothing's actually specified in my router. And the deal is that this is sort of the implied route. So it's automatically building the route and the controller and the template, or just not rendering the index template. So all of this is happening sort of by convention. But this idea that there's a URL and the URL is going to translate into a route is a thing that you're going to really focus on. We're going to focus on a lot, and you're going to want to really get used to and think of when you're designing the application. So let's sort of get our first to-do out of the list, which is we want to link on the home page to the registration form. And like, does this really need to be the first thing that we need to do? I don't know. No, yes, maybe. We're going to need to do it, so let's do it. Let's do it now. So let's start. We'll go back to the application HBS. So this is the template. HBS is handlebars. This is the template for the application. So outlet is sort of like yield in Rails. So the nested outlet. So the index is the nested route in this case, because where the application index route would be rendered in the outlet, which will feel pretty familiar if you're used to Rails. So what I'm going to do is add into the sort of header here a little login area. And for now, I'm just going to make a link to. Now, link to is a helper in Ember. And I'm going to open up Dash here and search for it. So link to is a component that renders a link to the supplied route name. And it's like a component that we could write, and we will write many as we go along, except this one's provided by the framework. So I'm going to say link to, and let's take a look at what the various syntaxes are. So I can say inline, I can say link to, and then the name of the link, and then the name of the route, which I think is what I'd want to do to start here. So like register user, and then this will be the name of the route. So now we can decide what we want the URL to be. And this is, again, we're always thinking in URLs. So I think that I want this to be, do we want a verb or noun? Verb or noun? So, I'll just say register user. Or registration. The thing about only registration is that I think I could have other meanings. So I'm going to say register user. And for now, while the application's in development, it's no sweat to, alter this. So we'll start with this, and maybe we'll change later. No big deal. Okay, so you'll see that the application now has an error. This is paused in debugger, and I want to see what the error is. So there's no route named register user, which makes sense, right? Because we haven't created it. So I'm going to use Ember CLI to create one. So kind of like Rails, the generators, we're going to say Ember G route, and then register user. And when we do that, it's going to, and I use the generators actually in Ember significantly more than I do in Rails. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that, but Ember CLI is quite good for this purpose. Okay, so let's see what it did. So it created a route, register user, created a template, and it added the route to the router, and it put a test in. So let's just take a look at all of those. I'm going to skip the test for now, but let's look at the other three. So you see that this is rendering now. It doesn't have the error because the route exists. And If we go to the router, we'll see that now there's a route at the sort of nested under the top level to register user. So this matches that, right? And there's also in the routes folder a register user route. Now the route is what is going to sort of take the visit to the URL and set up the control. It's sort of going to set things up based on where you visited, and then the template is what's going to be rendered. So this is all pretty straightforward. So when I click here, now if I use my Ember inspector, I can see that the current route is the application is the top level, which is why I have this. And it's also why I have this link still, because that was in the application template. But now rendered into the outlet of the application template is the registered user template right here, right? And this sort of gives an idea of what all of the various bits are that are being used. So it's in this registered user route that we want to add what will look like the form that we're going to use. So let's check off link on the home page. We've done that. And let's add the form. Okay. So we're going to do it here. All right, so when I save that, now you'll see it pop up, here. So I'll make this H3 actually. Right, so and if you want to sort of understand how things are getting rendered in the inspector, go to the view tree, and then when I hover over the thing that's being rendered, you'll see which part is that. So this is the whole thing because it's the application template, and then it has an outlet into which the registered user template is getting rendered, which you can see being outlined there. So this is helpful because we'll get to a place where there's a decent amount going on the screen, and this makes it relatively easy to see what's going on. Okay, so if we go, let's go to our, let me see here. So I'm going to run the server side of this, both run Rails S, and then I'm going to take a look at the documentation too. Oops, 3,000 now. All right, so if we go to users, let's just sort of get a sense as to what the user registration is going to have. So name, mobile phone number, email address, password, physical address, they're all required. And whether or not they should all be required or not, we'll adjust that as we go. But for now, they're all required. So we're going to create a form that handles all of them. Okay, so let's just do that. So I'll just make this input group for now. We don't have anything that styles this, and we're not using any like front end CSS frameworks right now. But if I just stay with this convention, if we want to switch to something, there's always a wrapper around sort of an input in any CSS framework or anything that I'd write myself. So we'll go with input group for now. So let's just sort of go through each of these. We'll add a label, right? So like name, and then we're going to want an input. Now we're going to use a helper for this too. So let's take a look at the documentation for that. Input. There we go. So it's input helper creates an input component, and this will give us all the documentation on it. So this one will be very simple, right? So we'll say value equals, and then this is what this is going to be bound to on the register user controller for now. Now, perhaps we should move this to a component. We'll deal with components a bunch, but I'll show what controllers are all about too. So I'm going to say that the value is equal to the model.name. Now, the model, that's a new deal, and we have not set that up yet, but we'll see. We'll see that in a second. Okay, so now you see I've got name and then this, and ideally then this would be bound, so this would be updating the name on an instance of user that is set on the controller. So you could see that then if you go, so Ember, and then we'll look at the route, look at the current route, look at the controller for register user. We could take a look at, so if I click on this guy, now $E is set to that controller, and if I say $E get model, see null. That's weird, right? Because I just set something on the model, so it means there is no model. And if I go to data, you'll see that there are no model types here. And ideally, we would see an instance of user because we want this to be set on that instance that then ultimately will persist. So, we haven't created a model and we haven't set it from the route on this controller. So, obviously this isn't going to be there, but this is how you could kind of see some visual evidence of that. So we'll go back to Ember CLI and say Ember G model user. And then we'll see what that does for us. Seems like it's taking longer than I remember. But okay, so now we've got a user model, and we're going to go into that. This is what a model is, and this is a pretty close match to the resource, like the user resource class in our Rails application. Now we'll have other models that don't exactly match, but I mean, for the most part, they're going to be pretty similar. So I'm going to say, okay, we have name, which is DS attribute. We've imported DS from Ember data, so we can use it there. Okay, so now we've got that. Now I can see that the model types, Ember knows that user is one of the model types, but there isn't one created yet. And the reason is when the application entered the registered user route, the registered user route has to set up the new user on the controller, which we didn't do. So we're going to go back to that and call model, and this will be return, and is it create record? I don't write tons of Ember, so I'm going to have to often look at the documentation on everything. Okay, so okay, it's the store, right? Duh. All right, so it's going to be this get store, and store has been injected into all the routes, so that's why we have that there. And then we're going to say create record user. Okay, so this is the type of model that it's going to resolve there. We've got to return this. And if you want to read more about routes, here we go. Ember route will tell you more about that. Let's see, routing guide. Even this link doesn't go where I wanted it to. So if you go here and then routing, and then like specifying models routes, here we go. So you'll see what we just did. So model, and then return, what we want the model to get set on the controller. So we did that. Okay, so now in the register user controller, which there isn't actually an explicit one of, but Ember is going to create one because when it doesn't see that there's one already, and this will set, or it will by default, the setup controller method that it calls is going to set the model on the controller to whatever is returned by this method on the route. Ugh, that's a mouthful. So now you'll see there is a user. That's because we've entered this route and this guy has set it on the controller. And it has no ID, no name, it's got nothing. Name's the only attribute that we've added. ID is something that all models have. And if I type this, you'll see that it updates that. So that means that that is getting set in the controller right, and this is bound. This input is bound to that. So good. That's what we wanted. So we're just going to go through and create a similar input for the other fields. So we had name, mobile phone number. We're going to use camel case on the attribute names. That's the convention in Ember. Now we've just added that here, so I'm going to go back and in the user model add this. Okay. We had email address. Password and physical address. So this now we're going to say type equals password. So we don't want it just to be plain text. And then this was physical address. All right, so let's go through and add all these. So mobile phone number, email address, password, physical address are the ones we're going to add. All right. So let's just take a look at this and we'll just quick see that these all set the way that we expect. Physical address does not seem to be there. And this one we'll say is a text area, the physical address, right? Because it's going to be a couple lines. So I may have actually. We'll see if is that right. I may have gotten this wrong. Okay, so text area is actually a helper unto itself, so it's not input. Which I sort of figured since it's a different tag in HTML. Okay, so I'm gonna click this guy. You can see physical address is getting set. So are the rest. No, I know what you're thinking, which is like not testing this is kind of bush league, and I agree. You know, I mean, we could have tests that set up all these models, but in general, I'm a little less concerned about these sorts of more like unit tests in the Ember app. I mean, the server is the thing we've got to protect, and that's protected quite nicely with tests. And then on the client side, I like to have some integration tests, which we're going to have to make sure that the flows work. But I don't think I need them for these lower level things right now, or and that may be a function of my speed of writing features test first on the client side, or maybe that's the right opinion, I don't know, but that's what we're going to do. All right, so that's all that, and now we're just going to put a save button. This is going to be action save user, save user. All right, now it's going to stick a save button here. And, obviously there's a ton more we can do to make this more interesting, but let's just get something working. So ideally, if I fill all these out and hit save, I want it to, I'd like it to save and see it in the server, and then maybe we'll go to like a registration confirmation page after that. Yeah, but maybe not. But so let's see if we can get that working. So we'll say Sean. Okay, so let's see what happens. So we see an error. So nothing handle the action save user, right? Well, we haven't done anything to handle that yet, so we need to. So we need a controller. We need to actually add explicitly the controller for registered user. So I'm going to go back to Ember CLI and do that. Okay, so it's going to add a controller. Then we have to add something to handle the action save user. And there's no magic in the naming here. Save user is fine. Save would be okay. Whatever. So I've got this controller. We'll go in. So we're going to say inside of add in the actions key. You'll have an object that'll have the actions. This will be save user function, and let's just make sure it's getting called to start with. Okay, so there we go, saving. So we've got that bit. So now we need to actually attempt to save it. So here we'll say this get model dot save, and let's take a look at what that does. So the save. Okay, so DS model save. It's going to return a promise, right? So save then. Then we're going to have a callback that handles the unsuccess and a callback that would handle if it failed. All right, and if you're unfamiliar with promises, you will get familiar with promises. It's a big part of Ember. It's a thing that will take some time to get your head wrapped around because it's quite different. I mean, if you've programmed a decent amount in JavaScript, it'll be easier. If you've spent most of your time in Ruby, it's going to possibly take a little bit of time to get used to, but it's not that bad. Okay, so we're going to say save then, and then we're going to have on success, and then on failure. So for now, we'll just handle the on success case. We'll add in here. I'm going to actually just make these and define these up here, and then we'll just pass these in. Be a little easier to read. All right, on success, and this will be the user, and we will console log the user. Okay, let's see what happens. Now this isn't going to work, but it'll sort of point us in the direction of getting it to work. Okay, let's see what the errors are, and we'll chase down. Okay, so it said it tried to post to localhost 4200/users. So this is wrong on two fronts, right? Should be posting to localhost 3000, where we are right now, because that's where the server is running, and it should be /v1/users. So we know we have to change those two issues at a minimum. It also says on failure is not defined, and let's define it. I think that's the error, but I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so we've got those two problems we saw. So the first is we've got to set the what the host is. So everything in Ember data that's, I'll go to the guides for this because I think it's going to describe it well. So everything related to sort of translating between an action in Ember data in the server is handled in adapters, which is here. So let's see what they say about this. So adapters determine how data is persisted to a backend data store. Yeah, so I think what I said is right. So so it's going to deal with sort of helping us talk to the server. So this is going to be where we set the two things that we're missing, or at least it sounds like it is. So let's take a look. Okay. So you can have adapters at the application level and then at lower level. So we're going to set an application level adapter, and then if for a given model, we have to have a totally different adapter because it's interfacing with a different server or a different, different application altogether. That's fine, but they're all going to inherit the application's adapter unless they're overridden. So let's do that first. So we don't even have an adapters folder now. So we are going to generate one. Ember G adapter application. And there's an adapter, or there's a generator for everything. You can just basically assume there's going to be one, use the name you think, and you can go to the Ember CLI website to get sort of the full list of types of generators there are. So let's see what it is. So it created the adapter, added a test. We're going to go up here, look inside. Now it gave us the REST adapter here. I'm actually not sure why it gives this instead of the JSON API adapter, which seems like to me what I would think it would give, but that's what we're using. And I think that's the default for how Ember data stores things now. So again, I'm not sure why the generator doesn't make this, but this is what we want. Okay, so we've got that JSON API adapter, and let's look at the other bits here. Whoops. So the namespace is v1. So we're going to add that, right? Because we saw that it didn't use v1 and it should have. So v1/. I think that's what we want. And then let's see what else here. So namespace, the next was the host. Now we're gonna have different hosts for different environments, but we're not dealing with environments yet. We'll get there once we get to the deploy deal. So for now, we'll just hard code this to localhost 3000. Okay, so that should fix the problems that we saw. So let's see what happens now. And let's do a couple things. So on the server side, we will see what happens on the server side. And I'll tail the logs. Okay. So let's fill out this form. Okay, so now when I save, there's a possibility this will work. We'll see if we run into a new issue, but the old issue should be fixed. Okay, let's take a look. So different errors, which is always good news. So you see I've got this extra slash in, so that's just me adding this when I didn't need to, so we're gonna get rid of that. And then there was a well, we'll see what that other error was, which is still going to be there. So now okay, so this URL looks right, but it says it violates the content security policy directive, connect RC, blah, blah, blah. Now, interestingly, it says that options on this was not found. And okay, yeah, right, because the problem is that there's a CORS problem on the server, so the server isn't accepting this request. So, and you can see that the error, because you use the on error callback. So let's take a look at that. So on failure, rather, the promise rejected, and that's why it logged that, which we can see here. So we've got a couple things to fix. So the first one is, let's fix the server side. We've got to add the CORS settings. So we're going to use rack. I think it's called rack CORS. Yeah, you can read all about CORS, which is cross origin resource sharing, right? Which makes having sort of this static application and then the server makes that possible. Otherwise, these requests are prevented for the security reasons that you probably know something about. So we're just going to follow the instructions on how to do this. Okay, so we're going to add this to our gem file. Okay, bundle install that. And let's read the rest of the instructions. So here we go, configuration Rails. So we're going to add in application RB this config of the middleware. And let's it's a little weird that the example that they give is not what, I guess it makes sense why, but it's not what we want. So I'm going to see what it is in this guy. Yeah. So we're going to take this and modify it as we see fit on our application. Okay. So origins, this is any. Get rid of that. So resource headers, any methods, all of the methods, including options. So I believe that this says that this will allow any of the headers on any resource, which is what we want, right? We want it, at least for now, we want this to be totally permissive, given that the whole purpose of the server is to be an API. So let's go with that. We'll see if that's right. Okay, so there we go. That's running now. And let's go back and see if we see a different error. Now, we still should see this because we haven't changed our content security policy on the client application, but we should have fixed the CORS issue. That is not what I expected. Let's try this again. There we go. Okay, so now let's take a look. So it did not give that second error, right? Because when it called options, which we'll see in the logs here, and it inserted and returned to a 1. So this is pretty awesome, right? So this means that this is happening exactly as we thought it was supposed to on the server. And it actually persisted the record as we expected that it would, and returned it. But we're still seeing this refuse to connect because of this content security policy. So let's fix that, and then then see if it all works. So content security policy. So let's just go look this up. I don't know if this is covered in the guides or not. So let's search them. It's not. That's not what I wanted. I've looked at some of these before, and they sort of describe the deal pretty well, so I might as well just find it. Okay. So I think for now what we'll do is just like literally address the individual security policies as we see them. I think that that's perfectly reasonable. And you also see in his comment here that if you prefer the nuclear option, simply remove the Ember CLI content security policy line from the package JSON and restart the server. Maybe that's what I actually want to do right now. I don't think that that's probably the right answer, but what I'll do is I'll create an issue. I'll create an issue in GitHub, and I'm going to mention that this is something we're going to want to deal with, right? So like implement content security policies. I'll even call this a bug, and I'm going to set it to someday, which I'll do in a second. I'm going to go back here. I'll add a label for someday. Right, so that'll say like, hey, I'm supposed to get back to this at some point. It's not ready to work now. I think that's probably a better label than the bug. So I'll go back here, switch that from there to there. And now we can take it out and sort of not fear that I'll forget about it later, which I certainly would, or I maybe would. All right, so back to our package JSON. All right, and then restart the server like you mentioned. Oh, you can see the content security policy violations are outlined quite clearly there. So let's try this again. All right, now on the server side, I'm going to reinstall everything. So I have a fresh server, that doesn't get in the way. All right, now I think that this will probably just work. Now, work is not all that interesting yet, but it's a pretty good accomplishment that we've got our Ember app connected to our backend. So when I hit save, let's see what happens. Awesome. So let's take a look at that. So on the server side, right, here's the request that was made. So users create is the controller that handled it. It posted to there, which is where we would expect. It sent in these parameters, sent in most of these parameters, and these ones got added by Rails. Whoops. Now, this can't verify CSRF token authenticity. Let's address that in a second, and we'll see kind of the activity here that we would have expected. It get inserted and return 201. And then on the server side, you could see if I go network, right, and I'll take a look at this post here, and then so you see the request is here, right, is what we just looked at. And then the response is what we would expect. So the JSON API response, and then that got dealt with by Ember the way that we would think. So now that's persistent. Which is cool. After this, we'll deal with logging in, I think. So, yeah, good. And this looks right. So, I mean, we've got the basic connection working with the server, and now we can sort of get to hooking up the workflow that we want. So let's talk about what that workflow would be. So, you know, this isn't what I think this is a little user hostile, but for now, what we're going to do is after register and save, how about we direct the user to a login page. And then the login page, they would use the email address and password to actually log in. And then, you know, which obviously you wouldn't want to do. It's not the right flow. We probably won't have them verify their email address and all this jazz. But for now, we're going to have the user gets created. It'll send them to a login page. We'll enter the credentials. And then what we want to do is exchange those credentials for the token. And we want to then use that, have that token then set who currently is logged in. Which is a whole bunch of new stuff, and tends to be a little bit intimidating for people that are working on projects that haven't done this before. So let's see if I've got enough energy to finish that up, and then maybe that'll be it. Okay, so let's add then that on success we are going to have this transition. I think it's transition to route, but let's see. Transition to route is the method on controller. Okay, so transition to route, and we're going to have it be the login route. Again, is that really what we want to do? Not really, but you know, whatever. That's fine for our purposes now. So I'm going to create that route. Login. I'll then add a link to it on the home page. And you know, hey, I know we're sort of meandering into the Ember stuff, but give you a feel for how to just get going on some things, and also get you a feel for how easy it is to add functionality, which is awesome. It's the whole sort of point. All right, so I've added that. So now I'll go back on my home page, which I need a link to. So I'll quickly add that. Okay, so then it goes back. And now I want a login link too. So in addition to this, I'll have to login. Cool, which works. So now when I fill this out, I want it to then send me to the login page. And let's let's do that. And then we'll handle the logging in. All right, so when I click this, then I should end up on the login page, which I did not. See what I screwed up? All right. I should transition to the ES6 deal here, but I did not. I have to go through and make sure I've got all my syntax right so this doesn't become a ES6 sort of Sean learns ES6 on the fly tutorial, because I forget some of it. All right, so now when I hit save, it brought me to login, which is great, and saved it on the back end, etc. So now let's implement the login form. And again, is this exactly how we want to do it? Probably not, but yeah, it's fine. All right. So I'll make an input group for the user. I think we'll do email address. All right, so in the value on this one, we're just going to do value equals actually username. We'll get back to why in a minute, but basically because an OAuth, that's the sort of name convention, so I'm going to use that for now on the controller, and then we'll do password. Okay, and then I'll have a button to log in. So this, when I add handlebars inside of an HTML tag, right, then I can add an action on the default, which is click here, and then pass an argument to this helper, the action helper, which is the name of the action we want to call on the controller, or not just controller, but we want to bubble up. It's first going to hit the controller or the component, depending on where it's getting called from. But in this case, it's the controller, and then it'll bubble through the routes, which we'll eventually have to deal with. But for now, I'll just put it on the controller. So I'll have this be login as the action. And there we go. All right, so now when I add these, I'm going to expect that if I look at my controller, my login controller, right, if I get the username, it's set to that. And if I get the password, it's set to what you can't see there, which is just ADF. So that's all setting as we would expect. So now when I click on login, let's see what happens, right? It's going to throw an error and say nothing handled login, which makes sense. We haven't even made that controller yet, so we'll do that. And then we're going to pause, and then I'm going to talk about Ember Simple Auth, which is what the library we're going to use. It's going to help us with dealing with authentication and sort of storing the token and having it stick around between browser sessions, etc. Okay. Make sure this gets called right, and then we will go and deal with Ember simple auth. So log in. Good. So that's all waiting now for us to figure out how to deal with auth. So we're going to use Ember simple auth. It's a very, very nice project, I think. And we're going to go to, oh, look at that. So Ember simple auth is at 1.0 now. So last time I used it, which was quite recent, it was still not at 1.0, and we had to use this branch that was tracking towards 1.0, but it looks like it's been released, which happened 2 days ago. So let's just read through this little release note, and then this is great. We should just be able to follow the documentation that is on the app. That makes it easier. You don't have to, I don't have to give you special instructions about using the right branch, etc. So here we go. Ember simple auth is at 1.0 now. They changed a bunch, so lucky you. Now that 1.0, this will not really change. It's compatible with all versions, and certainly the newest. It's only available as an Ember CLI add-on, which is nice, so that you don't have to deal with sort of old documentation. There's a session service. We'll talk about what services are as we go, but it's not automatically injected to routes. We're going to look it up, look the service up. It says, let's see. I'm not sure what this deal was, so we'll figure out if we need to care about that. We've got this authenticators and authorizers, which we will need. So we're going to have to deal with those. Yeah, so I mean, basically, what you can tell by this is that the docs are going to be good. It's a very thoughtful release notes. I've used this branch before, so it should be relatively straightforward. So I'm going to walk through this. It does a very nice job of sort of describing what Ember simple auth does for us, and then it'll make actually implementing it a little bit less about copying and pasting code and more we'll understand what the deal is. Okay, so Ember simple auth I think is a little intimidating when you read it, because it's written in a style that is frankly better than a lot of JavaScript that you've probably written or read before. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the source code. It's a small enough, lightweight enough library that you can understand what's going on, but the style is going to be perhaps unfamiliar and quite nice. So anyways, it handles authentication with Ember apps, and it has pretty minimal requirements, right? So it does as little as it can do and still provide sort of what we need. So here we go. Here are the 4 bullets. So it maintains a client-side session, which is great, right? So this is going to use the local storage of the browser to maintain information about who's logged in. So when I, open up the browser again or have multiple tabs, it's all going to be synced, which is perfect. We're going to just be authenticating the session against our own servers. It does have functionality to authenticate against external providers like Facebook or Twitter or whoever. It authorizes requests to backend servers, which means that it's going to add the header that we want into our request so that the current user is set on the server. And then, yeah, we can customize it and extend it as we'd like. Okay, so here are the things we need to care about. There's the session store, the authenticators, and the authorizers. And I think we're going to care about all 4 of these. Well, let's read about them. So the session service is the main interface. So it's the thing that gives us the methods that we'll use to authenticate and invalidate. Those are so log in, log out, basically the session. That's mainly what we'll use that for. So the session store then is what persists that state. So this is what's going to use local storage to take the data about the session and store it somewhere so that it can be retrieved. Then authenticators are going to authenticate the session, which is sending the credentials to the our server, to the auth endpoint to get back the token. And then the authorizer is going to inject the header into the request. So that's the, and I know, you know, maybe you're anxious for us just to get to use this, but if you understand those four ideas, the session service, the store, the authenticator, and the authorizer, then the rest of this is not going to be all that complicated. If you don't understand them, then it can feel like you're just copying and pasting code and not getting actually what's going on. So he mentions that there's this dummy app that implements a complete auth, which is very helpful. We'll probably refer to that as we go along because it has good reference and a bunch of things to do. I'm going to skip over that now, but that's a very helpful thing that he did. That's nice. And this will, you know, this will be a dummy app, I think, for some people to implement a very specific version of what's enabled by Ember Simple Auth. But for us, we're going to skip down here and install the library. Okay. So that's added. So let's just walk through it. Basic usage. So now that we've installed it, we can inject the session service wherever we would like. So for example, on the application controller, we can inject it, and then that'll give us the session on the controller, and then we can use the isAuthenticated property to do things in the template that controller is bound to, or vice versa, and do something like this in the template, which we're going to use right now. So why don't we do this? So this is in the app. We're actually going to do exactly what you just did. So in the application, do we have an application controller? We don't have an application controller, so we're going to generate one. We're going to inject that service, and then since we currently in the application template have the login link, we're going to only show that if we are not authenticated already, right? Which is exactly what this would typically be used for. So I'm going to grab this, go into the application controller. There we go. And then in our template, I'm only going to show this if we are not authenticated. So I should just be able to say session is authenticated, which again, we just read about that property here. We can, you know, click in there to read more. But I should be able to say this, and then if we are authenticated, we're going to want to like add a logout route or logout link. Otherwise, let's show the login. We need to restart. So anytime you add a new package, you've got to restart the server, which is why it's not picking up on the session service. Well, that's what I think. We'll see. It's sort of like a Spring, stopping Spring, kind of same idea. There we are. So we're seeing the login because we are not authenticated. And in fact, if I just put that, if I put session is authenticated into the template, we'll see false. Right. Okay, so good. This is working. Now you can see some things this gives us, right? So once we've got the session, then we'll have, the session has this method invalidate on it. That's going to be the logout. That's what we're going to call when we have logging out. But what we need to do is figure out what to do to log in. So let's figure that out. I'm just going to actually, while I'm looking at it, I'm going to just add this to our. Nah, I'm not going to do that. Never mind. We'll come back and add a logout action later. So let's read the rest. For authenticating the session service provides the authenticate method. It takes the name of the authenticator as well as the other arguments, depending on the specific authenticator. So we're going to have to define an authenticator to use and then extend one of the types of authenticators that are built in. And we're going to use actually the one he mentions here, which is the OAuth 2 password grant. So let's do this. And I think the key thing on this is I'm like literally just, I've never actually seen this particular documentation. So you really should have confidence you can go through this too. If you just carefully read, what he's outlined here, and make sure you understand the bits and follow the instructions. It really is such a nicely done library that you're going to have your basic needs met just fine, which is great. If you have trouble, we can look at the examples, but we shouldn't really have trouble. So we're going to define an authenticator here. Okay, so we're going to add OAuth 2. All right, and I can literally copy this because this is exactly what we're doing. So we're going to import the from the OAuth 2 password grant authenticator, which is what we're doing, right? And then export that. But let's see if we need to customize it at all. So I'm going to see if he's got anything about customizing it here or not. I don't see anything. So I'm going to take a look actually here, and we're going to peer into this file because I think that we're going to need to customize it. There it is. Okay. Let's take a look through this. Okay, so here we go. Server token endpoint. We need to make sure that this matches. I think we're going to need to customize this. Now let's go back to our server and just remind ourselves what the token endpoint is. Now this actually reminds me, we did not, I don't think, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think that we actually provided in our documentation on the server, documentation about logging in, which I'm going to make an issue for now because we should have done that. Totally forgot to for whatever reason. But not something that I generally want to forget. So let's add documentation about OAuth token. Okay. So let's take a look at what so it's OAuth token that is our server token endpoint. Good. So we've customized that now. which is, it's just /token by default, so we had to do that. All right, I think that's all that we have to do. Yeah, I don't see anything else that we have to customize right now. So let's take a look. Let's just keep looking through the instructions. So now we've customized that one thing. And so when we go back to here, so it says we can use this authenticate method on the session service in order to log in. Okay, so let's add that here. So a couple things. So one, we need to add the session to this. Okay. And then I'm going to say this got session and then authenticate, and then let's look how to use this method. Authenticate, here we go. So this is the authenticator. So let's look at an example on this one. Oh, here we go. So authenticate, and then identification and password, which is, this is what we're using too. So, okay. And then this is, so identification and password. So I think that we are going to want to use sort of the conventional way to refer to the username and password for OAuth, which it looks like is identification and password. So I'm going to go back here and change this to identification instead, just to go with the flow, right? I mean, it wouldn't matter. It could be obviously something else, but I mean, we could keep it as username, but I think it's better to not deviate without a reason, and we're actually going to use exactly this then, right? So we're going to set these two variables equal to the two things that were just set there. So ID, password, identification, password, there we go. And then we will pass these in as the other arguments. And then let's see what else this does. All right. So this is, okay, so if there is an error, then it's going to set on this controller an error message, the error message property with the value, the error on the reason. Yeah, we probably want to do more than that, but that's, you know, for now, let's just have it do that, and we'll see what happens from there. All right. Yeah, so well, whatever. Let's try to log in. Let's see what happens. Okay, so post to localhost 4200 OAuth token. Okay, so we need to add that host in. So we'll do that. Oh, I have to go help my family. 1 second here. I have to go help my family with something, so I will be back in about 3 minutes. Hold on. All right. Let's get back to it. So what we saw when we tried to log in is that it tried to post to localhost 4200, so to itself. And what we need to do is add then the host to the server token endpoint, which makes sense. I don't know why. I mean, it was dumb of me not to just do that in the first place, because this isn't sort of inheriting from the adapter which we set the host on, right? And this is another thing where we'll need to have this depend on the environment, but right now we only have one environment, so no reason to sweat that really. All right, so now when I click login on our server back here, we should see this login happen. Oh, okay, look at how sweet this is. So now it may have looked like nothing happened, but that is not accurate, right? So when I hit login, all of a sudden, look, the log out now link is there, because back on our application template, we said if the session is authenticated, then show the logout link. Otherwise, show the login. So that means that it worked. So let's sort of check for evidence of that. So if I go to resources and look in my local storage here, I'm going to see this Ember simple auth session. So I mentioned that it's set on localhost 4200, and you'll see the store. This is back when we read about the 4 ideas in Ember simple auth. One of them is the store, and this is the store. There's my access token. So even if I close this down, if I shut Chrome, right, and then come back to Chrome, I'm still logged in, which is cool. So let's actually implement the logout button now while we're at it. I think it was invalidate is what we just read. Let me see. Yeah, invalidate. Yep, so now when I go back to this, and here, instead of just having plain text, I'll actually just make a button. It wouldn't have to be a button, obviously, it could be anything, but I'll make it a button for now. Say log out, and make it a logout button. There we go. We're gonna make the text log out. And that logs me out. Okay. Okay, so now we'll have redirect back to the home page if it authenticates correctly. And then we'll have our basic login functionality working. And I'm pausing here and I looked at this. It feels a little... Well, I'm going to see in what he says here about how he does this, because it feels a little weird that that this doesn't return a promise. But, so he's going to address this. So it can be authenticated with the authenticating method. That's what we're doing. It says the session service also provides the authentication succeeded and invalidation succeeded events that are triggered when the session is successfully authenticated or invalidated. Okay. To have these events handled automatically, simply mix application route mixin into the application route. So we could do that if we wanted to. automatically maps the session events to the session authenticated and session invalidated methods it implements. Okay, so session invalidated is going to reload the page. Session authenticated will transition to a configurable route. We're not gonna handle this bit yet. Okay, so I think we're gonna do this. Seems like we would like that. So in the application route, which we actually don't have, okay, so let's add that. And let's just tinker to make sure we understand what this is going to give us. No. Okay. There we go. So there we go. That gave us that functionality. By default, it took us to the application route. We could configure that, but that's what I wanted, so I'm fine with that. Log out. There we go. Cool. So that was easy. Okay. Now, why don't we see what happens if we fail the login? It's interesting to know. Okay, so nothing is the short answer. Now it should have set the error message property on this controller. So if I go to the login HBS here, now I'll put here. Interesting. So it didn't set anything. So let's take a look at what the reason is. Oh, there we go. Okay, now I'm not sure what happened before, but so we see invalid grant. Now, instead of actually printing that, we could do like if error message, there was a problem with your credentials. Cool. So good. So let's take a pause. So we've got our basic login, log out. Now, one thing that it would be nice is it'd be nice if we knew who was logged in, right? So if I log in as me here, it'd be nice if it said like, welcome Sean, or my email, whatever it knows about me. So we're going to use that me route on the server to get that. So I think I've got energy for about one more little feature. So we're going to implement that, and then I think I'm going to call it quits. So we're gonna create a service which we'll call session user in order to give us this functionality. I'm gonna see if he does something similar in this. I think he may do it in the dummy app, and I've done it in other apps in case I want to look at what I've done before. But let's see if he does it. And in fact, I may just look at something that I've done before. So we'll cheat a little bit. And I'll look at this. Okay, so we are going to make a service, which we're going to call session user. He gives us the session service, but we're going to add this one. So and then again, the session user is going to be a service where we can see who the session's user is, which is a little bit different idea than what just the session itself does. Okay. So we are going to grab the session in the store, then add a computed property, which is changing, which is taking a look at the access token, so session data authenticated access token. So when that changes, then it is going to find the record from the store, the user me. And then I'm going to get rid of the adapter options because we're not going to include anything else now. Okay, so find record, that's the type of model. This is the ID, which we're using me, which is the magic one from before. And then in our application controller, controller application, here we go. Then we can say session user. Then this. And then in our template, we should be able to say if it is authenticated, like welcome, and then this will be session user dot name, and it would have the name of the user connected to that login. So let's see if it works. So it says 404 not found, which is interesting. We're going to figure out why. We should have had a test. So what we're going to do is make sure that we adjust our tests on the server side to fix this issue, because it should, frankly, be fixed. Okay. Oh, okay, this is good. So this is clear why the problem is. So let's take a look at the server logs and see if we can spot the problem. So v1 user's me, that's what we'd expect. The parameter ID was me. Then look at what it is. So it said where user's ID is null. Now, if you remember what we did when we implemented this server, okay. When we implemented this, let's look at the user's controller. So the user's controller, we are setting the params ID to the current user's ID. Now, this makes it pretty clear that the problem is that the current user must not be set. So for example, if I raise here, so like raise I guess what I would want to do actually is sort of render a 401 or whatever the right HTTP code here is. I don't want to look into that now. So let's sort of address the direct problem, and then we'll figure out if there's anything we want to do on the server side to make the error message a little bit better. The problem is that the bearer token's not being passed in with the request, because if you remember back to what we read about Ember simple auth, we need to not just implement the authorizer, we have to also implement the authenticator. Right, so let's read about that. So it says authenticator implements the concrete steps necessary to authenticate the session. Okay. No, authenticator we already talked about. Authorizer, here's the right. So authorizers use the session data which we got back from the authenticator to construct authorization data that can be injected into the outgoing network request, right? So this was what was missing, so this is what we need. Now you'll notice there is a typo, so we are going to be good citizens and fix this, and then we'll get back to this. So I'm just going to do it right in here. I don't often do this, but okay, so we fix that little. All right, well, there we go. That's, try to always do that if I ever see a little mistake like that. So back to it. Authorizers, okay, here we go. So we have to add an authorizer like we did the authenticator. And we're going to use this OAuth2 bearer, which adds that header in. So let's add that. Okay. And this is just, we're not going to have to do anything different than this. So we'll literally copy and paste it. Okay. So let's keep reading. So unlike previous versions of Ember Simple Auth, authorization will not happen automatically for all requests the application issues. It has to be in, okay, so this is different. So I'm glad I read this. Now we can just mix the data adapter mix-in into the application adapter to make sure that all of them are authorized, which is what we want. So good. Adapter, good. And then we have to add what the authorizer is, which is OAuth2. Is that actually the name? I'm actually not positive what. Well, we're about to find out if this is the right name or not. Like, in other words, like, what does it resolve from? Is it resolved from the name of the file? I think that's probably what it's doing. Well, we're going to find out. So now, yeah, bingo. So now it says, welcome, Sean D. So if we look on the server side, we'll see when we make this request now, it's loading the doorkeeper access token from the header and returns back 200 OK, which is awesome. So now again, we log in, and this is, someone comes in, they've just got their username and password, it's accurate, and bang. Not only does it say yes, they're real and gives the token, but it requests their information, which we can then use to preload all sorts of other things. All right. So I think that's a great stopping point. So I think we accomplished what I'd hoped to. So now on our web client, right, we've got user registration done. We've got and again, done as in not polished, but we've got the basic flow, and now making it more polished is going to be straightforward. We've got that done. Then we can log in. Again, that flow is a little janky, but we'll get that fine. When we log in, the application knows that it's authenticated. It's storing the token locally, which is great. And then it's fetching who the user is that just logged in, so we can display information about them, which means that the authorization injection's happening right. We can log out, and that's a relatively big deal. So now all of the requests that we make are going to get have the current user attached to them correctly. We've got our basic simple Ember app. You've at least been introduced to some things. We've got the adapter configured, at least to work with our development environment. And next time we will go about sort of implementing the basic capabilities for the resources that we had. So that'd be like create an organization, connect a user to the organization, create an auction, add donations, and be prepared for that to go very fast. It'll be very easy to add the basic functionality, which is awesome. And then we can start making it a bit more interactive. And then I think from there, we'll do the authorization on the server side to make sure that, the users can't take actions that don't make sense out of their context. And then I think, we'll do some basic client stuff. But I think before we do any design stuff, we'll actually get the deploy process working. So both on Heroku on the server side, and then on AWS, just S3 on the web client side. So there we go. See you next time.